We have a fantastic night of programming ahead. As Alexis mentioned, keynote speaker coming right up, sports finance, journalism, analytics, all coming up in a really packed 3-hour time window here tonight. So let's just get started here. Let's start with the opening keynote. It's going to be with Ezra Kucharz and Paul Rabil, as they mentioned before. First, let's introduce Ezra. We had a little conversation before here. We'll get to the actual title. So Chief Business Officer of DraftKings, an adjunct professor at Duke University. But the fun fact here, he actually built GoDuke.com 26 years ago. Ezra, how are you? Good evening.
Hey, how are you, Dan? Thanks for that intro. It's one of my little known factoids. Long ago, I used to build websites with a bunch of my Duke buddies when we were grad students there. So thanks for that. You're still there. You go. All right. So thank you, everybody. I want to introduce my friend and founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, Paul Rabil. Paul, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
All right. We're going to have a little fun tonight, and we're going to dive right into what we're here to talk about, which is sports entrepreneurship and sports business here at this conference. And we're going to try to have a little fun along the way. And what I wanted to start off with is, before you started the PLL, you were one of the few lacrosse players, professional lacrosse players, that were able to make a full-time living off the sport as a professional. And how were you able to do this? And what kind of advice can you give to other athletes or students as they try to come out into the workforce? You did something that no one else had done at the time.
Yeah. Great question to start with. I feel like I have to give some disclosure around our relationship. Ezra and I go back 10 years or so. And sometimes I leading into this, I was like, I think I should be interviewing Ezra versus the other way around. I sat in his office when he was running CBS. And I think that was the time where I was trying to figure out exactly what you asked me, how to be full-time as a professional athlete. And I guess that's subjective around means of which we can live by. And any entrepreneur that has raised capital or worked on an idea to build a shell to then go raise capital has figured out how to get used to eating street meat in New York City and bunking up with friends. I would say that the biggest challenge, whether you're that type of person or aspire to be, and there's greatness to that. And then there's also the other side of it, which is one of life's many paradoxes or conundrums, is that if you're fully resourced early, you tend to lean back in your chair more than the benefit of literally having to work to survive. And I've now done that twice. First as just a professional athlete, where I was getting paid $8,000 for the season in a league called Major League Lacrosse, and then had no choice but to try to figure out, I think like action sports athletes, how to make additional revenue, because I was able to see where we could be, largely tied to graduating in 2008 out of Johns Hopkins. And I was one of the first athletes to launch a Facebook page that was a fan page, not a friend page. And they had just unlocked that capability. Lacrosse wasn't on TV, but people were following me, and those people were lacrosse fans. And it occurred to me that, oh, there's something here, even though lacrosse isn't being serviced or hadn't been serviced before. And then I signed my first endorsement deal because brands were still at the time working off the side of their desk on social media. Many of them thought, took the words out of Vince Vaughn's mouth in the breakup, where he called tweeting twanting, just like a forum for vanity and wanting people to like you. And I struggled with that, as I'm sure anyone who influences online. And then as we found over the next 10 years, is some of these brands' largest departments are their kind of new media business units that are running social, because it's the most captivating way to build an audience and get to the bottom of the funnel, as marketers will say. But I sat in that office with Ezra going, how am I going to figure next step out? How am I going to take, small dollars to medium-sized dollars? And one of the things that we talk quite a bit about is, in our business, we're really more in the entertainment business or the show business than the sports business. And the hard thing about, and the difference maybe between starting a software business versus starting a sports league, is you can grind out software push back deadlines, figure out product market fit. Customers learn with you along the way as you polish your UI, UX. In sports, when you launch, you've got to fake it till you make it in a way. And that thing's got to be a beautiful product on standard with the big four. Sports leagues, where behind the scenes, you're like sweating and bleeding every day to try to get there and convince the market that you're there when you're not. And that was kind of my mentality as a pro lacrosse player, not telling anyone I was getting paid $8,000 and trying to present like I was getting $8 million, because a lot of what we do is aspirational. So if someone doesn't feel inspired to play in the PLL or to be a pro lacrosse player, there's going to be no growth. So there's maybe we should be talking more about psychology than the business of sport. But I guess that's what you meant by fun.
It's funny. I look back at, I think that first meeting was about a little over 10 years ago. We had been introduced by some mutual friends, and you and I don't know, we've had dozens, if not many more discussions through the years of, just different topics around entrepreneurship and growth. And, when you look back to, your college days or your early playing years, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? And what gave you that like entrepreneurial bug? Did something happen, or you just what you've always wanted to do?
I don't know. I grew up in suburb of Maryland, this area called Montgomery Village. And, I tell people, hey, I grew up in Maryland. They're like, no wonder you play lacrosse, but I didn't start playing lacrosse until middle school. In the area of Maryland that I grew up didn't really have much lacrosse. It's really Baltimore and then Long Island when it comes to New York or upstate New York, not Manhattan and not DC when we were growing up. And there was no YouTube or social media, so access to lacrosse was small. So I never even thought about a life in lacrosse, even when I first was given a stick by my neighbor or went to, I forget the name of like the youth sport retailer to get the rest of my equipment. I had the gene, I guess like the entrepreneurial gene coming from my Lebanese roots, where my grandparents who came through Ellis Island, they started a coffee shop in Winston-Salem and then a clothing business. My dad was a paper salesman. My mom was an art teacher, and Mike and I couldn't wait for the snow to hit the Northeast so we could shovel driveways for $20. And then in the summer when it was hot, put up a lemonade stand. I think it's just more in our blood than our dreams, because it's been kind of painted as all glorious and sexy. You see it on like the cover of Inc. Mag or Fast Company. And you just have to be careful, because it's not that. Assume you're not going to be that. And it's kind of like, Tom Rothman, who's one of the major studio executives, he's at Sony, and one of the last ones that have been around for 30 years, sits across from him, Leonardo DiCaprio, Will Smith. And he tells any pursuing actor or director or writer in the business that if they don't absolutely love it, get the fuck out of the business, because you're going to fail and fail a lot. And so if you don't like building, and if you don't like being relentless and dealing with a lot of no's, and so it's kind of like a little sadistic, get out of the startup business. It's probably a better bet.
It's one of the things I was going to bring up. Like, I get to, in the roles I've had over the last 25 years, I get to work with a lot of athletes and celebrities. And what strikes me about you over this time is you work harder, you hustle more, and you're relentless than probably any other professional athlete I've ever worked with. And I don't say that lightly. I mean that. Talk a little bit about, you were just touching it on there, that relentless piece. How much is that paid dividends for you to be successful, whether as an athlete, entrepreneur, or the founder of the PLL?
Yeah, I think it's one of the top characteristics you can bring to the workforce is resilience, relentlessness, grit. And then there are the other side of the soft skills that you develop with age and perspective and failure, which is empathy and kindness. And it's always difficult to balance the two. But I think we all strive to find that balance. It's not too difficult as a lacrosse player, especially a professional lacrosse player, to surround yourself with no's, because the industry is built around basketball players and football players and baseball players. So, it's been hard, and it's still hard to this day when I look at my resume of what I've accomplished, and even some of my peers in action sports and folks that I'm close with, Tony Hawk, to obviously like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady or Steph Curry on the other side, Abby Wambach, Sue Bird, people who have set records and built legacy, and the media and the world knows that and establishes that. So they have to, they don't have to beat their chest. And while I stay away from beating my chest, you get put in situations a lot where you have to like, let me like just give you this edit on my bio. And so it's like it's kind of a dark place to be, but I think it's also created that scrappiness that you reference, is like, hey, what about us? And then my vision and what I hope for, when I was walking the streets of New York yesterday talking with Mike, who's my brother and co-founder of the PLO, is that the next pro lacrosse players don't have to deal with that bullshit like I did. And they'll get paid 4, 5, 10, 20 times wages that I did. And that's what we're building. And yeah, we have large chunks of shares in that business. So as they win, we win. But no disrespect even to this group, and I'm super excited to be here. Like, I get introduced as Paul Rabil, and like that happens, and like I think that that's a good thing still. It's humbling, and then it's also like, yeah, there's a lot of work to do because we got to create more mainstream awareness. And then to be fair, like off the boat, it's actually Rabil. I think the folks at Ellis Island decided to connect it from a rhyme to Rabil and table. But anyway,
it's all good. Talk to us a little bit about the backstory of the founding of the PLL. Like, one day you wake up and you and your brother start talking, and next thing you know, you're moving forward on the concept that's the PLL. Give us the backstory a little bit on that.
Oh man. So it was kind of that, right? I was getting paid $8K to play. I was, multiple time MVP in the league, and the wages were less the issue as kind of what we thought was the effort going into progressing the sport, which side by side, I was in 2008, but MLS was, the story of MLS meeting in Phil Anschowitz's farm in 2000, getting ready to shut the doors. MLL was really like side by side to MLS from a growth period. They had launched in 2000 as well. At one point, it was more successful. And then you have the UFC and their latest like 27-year run. So we were already entering this time with new tech and media where the opportunity was ripe. And here's the thing about lacrosse: we're not playing slam ball. This is a sport that is the oldest in North America. It's an indigenous game. That narrative and story has been lost and in some cases hijacked by elitism in the Northeast and access, which is difficult for any expensive equipment sport, be it lacrosse, hockey, golf. And the difference between football and everywhere else is football was subsidized in the 70s at the local level. So anyone who played Pop Warner or rec football growing up, you never had to pay for your helmet or pads. You had to pay for your helmet and pads. Football's actually the most expensive sport. But they went the route of subsidizing through government care and funding, which is brilliant. So Jeffrey Wright played lacrosse. For those who don't know, he was just on the red carpet for the Batman premiere. Brilliant actor out here. Or I'm in New York, but out in LA, and he's become like a friend. And he always reminds me, like, elitism and access is not a lacrosse problem. It's an American problem. And it's not a reflection of the game. It's more of a reflection of our country. And so anyway, like, lacrosse has gotten bucketed into that. And interestingly enough, I think one of the biggest turns that we're still healing from as a sport is 2006's the 2006 allegations of the Duke rape case that happened on the lacrosse team. And when we think about those allegations and the impact that that had on the world's perception of lacrosse, it was on the cover of Time magazine, covered daily and across all the media and news channels. And we're still healing from that, even though all of the players were exonerated and such. And the situation wasn't a great one, no doubt. But lacrosse had gotten to this difficult place. And so going back to where it was when we saw it is like, I have experienced this because that was my age and my class. And then I was playing at the highest level. I was traveling the world playing for Team USA. And I saw so many people wanting more access to the pro game and not getting it. And we essentially, Ezra, I'll speed this up. We had owners that invested a lot into MLL, but they weren't operating it. And they treated it as if it was great real estate on, waterfront of XYZ coast of America or Europe. And as the sport continued to grow, that real estate would increase in value. And that's never happened in pro sports. So as I got smarter and Mike ended up reaching this crossroads as a career, we came together, we go, why don't we just go buy MLL and see if we can fix it? It was a speculative thought. We knew the likelihood was low, but they invited us in the data room and we learned more about it. And they wanted to sell to us, but at a ridiculous price. And we had some overhead capital at the time to try to cover it. And the more we knew, the more we didn't. So we just uncovered more. And we saw, damn, there's a real opportunity here. And that's what kind of struck NewCo idea of PLL.
When, you and your brother have spoken about like the importance of investors, right? In line with your interests when you raised money. Was that a big emphasis as you were getting started, and why were you looking for the right investors?
Well, because we were taking on a business that was much larger than a typical startup. I think like a league at least our league is an umbrella for 7 companies, right? You have your product, which is the lacrosse game. We call it Lax Product and Lax Ops. Then you have your media business. You're building a media company. You have a sponsorship business. So you're building an entire agency. You have a tickets business. You have a merchandise business. You have a youth academy business, and you have a nonprofit. And every day, every one of those businesses need, full stack individual P&L and executives and team underneath them. You can't do that out of the gate. So as Mike and I looking to hire our first, kind of ops expert. And so we looked at our investor perspectives, and we wanted those who could roll their sleeves up with us, who had experience in sports. Rain Ventures was at the top, but then we looked at groups like Chernin. We looked at, and we still have people like Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment. Full disclosure, Ezra came on personally. And so we had, now our largest investor now is Joe Tai, who's a co-founder of Alibaba, runs the Brooklyn Nets, and is brilliant. And so investors who kind of covered 3 areas. One had kind of deep pockets, so they could invest in long term and not look at a business that would go profitable in 18 to 36 months. But we're still stewards of that capital. Number 2 had experience in the sports media ecosystem. And number 3 had bandwidth to take that experience to actually help. There's so many investors out there that have subject matter expertise, but zero bandwidth. So we vetted that, and that was super helpful.
So when you got started with this, you've always said it's a player's first league, right? Why did you feel it was important, and what steps did you take to maximize the players' individual brands within the league?
Yeah, well, our players have been shit on for so long by professional lacrosse and its history. I mean, I've talked about our wages, but there's also a lack of transportation resources. Guys were picking up their own Ubers and cabs, and staying at 3-star hotels, and it wasn't a great experience. If you don't give and there's 2 types of customers as a pro league, it's your players in a way, and then your fans. If you're not giving your customers a good experience, then they're not going to be performing at their highest level. And pro sports is about performing at the highest level. And then the future trend of what we saw was that athletes that had the ability to run their own media, a la social, were now becoming bigger brands than the teams and the leagues. And that flipped the model on its head. And they started understanding that value, which was essentially like a customer acquisition tool, and sponsorships, which I was getting to survive as you asked that first question, to other athletes that were potentially looking at sponsorship as a means to just create a cushion in their economic prosperity. They started saying, hey, I want to convert, or in lieu of that cash, give me equity in said brand. So athletes were getting more familiar with what it was like to get stock options or equity grants in companies through sponsorship. And then we just saw that like PAs, so players associations, were leaning more towards understanding the jump in sports league and team valuations. And you look at, the NFL players of the 50s, not only the delta in their wage from NFL players now, but what if they helped or had a piece of the teams and leagues back then? So we felt like that was where the future was going, and building a single entity business. We thought critically around our cap table, and typically, you have your founder shares, then you have your investors that own preferred, if you have a preferred common pool, and then you carve out your employee cap table, which can be refreshed, but it's typically 8 to 10%. So we've carved out a portion of that and allocated that to our players. And so when we say it was player first league, we wanted to, stop all the bullshit of players booking their own travel and reimbursing them. We book all that stuff for them now, and they stay at nice hotels. But we also wanted to give them a piece of the league so that they could feel like, even though we quadrupled on average their wages out of the gates and we gave them healthcare, we also wanted them to give them a piece of the upside.
When you started the league, and still to this day, you've kind of gone with a tour-based model, right? Mm-hmm. Where you move the games from city to city each week, and you don't have a city-based model right now. Why'd you go with a tour-based model? And is there a city-based model in the future, or are you going to stick with the tour-based model? What do you think?
I grew up idolizing Michael Jordan and that class of NBA players that never really took free agency to go to another city. They may get traded, but the loyalty to city and city tied to fandom and sports, it means a lot to me. But being a practical operator means more. And if I looked at like the addressable market of lacrosse fans, and even looked at historicals, even if I disagreed with the way the MLL had been operating, it wasn't working in cities. They didn't own venues. The supply demand wasn't there on a market to market basis. And not owning the venues, you fight for leases on venues and then have to sell and hopefully sell out your summer season for 8 home games. And that's hard for the NBA. The NBA in a lot of cases has 40-person ticket sales teams essentially looking to move 2,500 seats a night, not 18,000, 2,500, because they're getting 80% of the venue booked a year on season ticket sales. So 40 people selling 2,500 tickets, that shows how difficult it is to sell a ticket to a sports league. So Tourbased created supply demand for us. We looked at the best property in lacrosse, and it was the Final Four. It descends upon one city, 4 of the best college teams in the country at a professional venue. So you have leverage on the lease. And then the other piece was, if we took out a venue like Gillette for the weekend and we want to get a network partner, which was item number 1, the biggest challenge for network partner and linear inventory is booking that programming window, sometimes 2.5 years out. But if we have the venue for the whole weekend and they have open inventory, boom, we'll just take it then. We don't have to worry about only having Thursday or Friday night available in a home market. So those were like the key decision parts for us. I think we will have cities at some point, but there's a way to thread the needle where you can have city or local affiliation while still being on the road.
Yep, definitely. So when being a founder of something, it's always difficult to find the right co-founder. It's like really hard. Yeah. You're doing it with your brother. What's the advantages or benefits of that, and the challenges, right? What do you, when you guys fight, what is it like? And when you guys agree on something, is everybody else in the room going, oh God, they're in agreement?
Oh man, it's hard. We try to reserve most of our fighting behind the scenes. So like on occasion, you might see us, spar a little bit in the office with closed doors, but I think it's really important that both of us are a bit older, and so we've had our fair share of scraps through our adolescent, teens, 20s, and this business is just so important to both of us that it's rare that we allow our emotions to get high, which essentially like brotherly feuds live. And then we both see therapists around it and business coaches and stuff. What you can count on with mixing work and family is loyalty. And you need a lot of loyalty building a sports league. I think there's been like 122 leagues or so that have opened up since 1990. And like 121 have failed, so we're hanging on. And so you just need a co-founder that you can trust, that knows when you fuck up, and vice versa, that like, you just pick up the phone an hour later and you're all good.
So this is an interesting year for you this past year, right? You decided to retire.
Yeah.
And, you have been playing in the league and running the league at the same time. Talk a little bit about, what it was like being a player and a founder. And then when you made the decision to kind of step down as a player, talk about what that's been like.
It was more difficult than I thought it would be. If it's hard being the face of a league, and LeBron's the face of a league, Tom Brady's the face of a league, Ovechkin, face of a league. You're always going to get shit from your peers because they're going to think that, the business is rolled out in your favor. I remember like the rumor from the bubble down in Orlando was that LeBron had a mansion and every other athlete was like bunking up in Disney's hotels. Right. And like most of the stuff isn't true. But I felt like, hey, I've faced this and I'll continue to face it. What was different when we launched the PLL and I was playing is that most of the adversity had come from, if not all of it actually, had come from my opponents, where they'll talk their shit and like, all right, move on. I was in the locker room with my teammates and they were kind of like, in a way, this guy signs the back of my check. And I'll give an example of like, one of our defenders hit someone high and was ejected from a game in the beginning of the season in 2019. And then it went to our disciplinary committee for review. And you start looking at fine schedules and suspensions. And, your teammates are like, hey, what's going to happen, Paul, at practice? And I'm recused from this, right? I can't sit in on this. But fact of the matter is, in any business, a startup, a growth stage company, a Fortune 500, romantic relationships, platonic, familial, is what actually matters. And we're finding this now even politically is emotion and how people feel, less facts, unfortunately. So I've learned a lot about that in the business of psychology. And, but I would say that was like the biggest stressor that led to, potentially an earlier retirement than I would have if I had stayed in the MLL. That was the biggest pain point for me, was suiting up for practice and every game weekend and not feeling like I was a part of the locker room how I used to. And I remember Clara Ty, who's Joe's wife, and she runs the Nets and she's brilliant. I remember venting to her after the first season and she said, Paul, that moment when you just accept that you're never going to be one of the guys again in the locker room, you're going to be better off and you'll have, the end of your career the way that it should go.
Very cool. When shifting gears a little bit, when you think about innovation and the league and what you guys might be able to do in the coming years, what comes to mind? Like, what gets you excited?
Well, great tee up for our alignment, sports betting.
That wasn't meant to be a softball.
Can we negotiate in front of your class?
We're going to negotiate in front of everybody.
We're a single entity. And so like high level, there's basically two structures for composition of sports leagues. Most of what we're used to seeing is a trade association, like the NFL or the NBA, where the board of governors are the individual owners whether it's the NFL or the NBA, and they make decisions, and your commissioner services your owners. And then there's single entity, where the league controls all of the teams and the decisions, and you're more effective that way. And there's pros and cons to both. And then you have the hybrid model, where like MLS is still single entity, and their franchise owners are actually what they call investor operators, where they buy into the league. They own and operate their team. There's a rev share on tickets and media and local versus national sponsorship. But their equity is in the league, trade association equity in the team. And there's some nuance in that hybrid model where they get the largest sum of any type of exit and sale. But we're the true single entity organization, so we can move really quickly. So with as fast as the business of sports is moving, we're typically making moves first in things like metaverse to NFTs to tokens to fans and such, even though we have a much smaller operating team. Another example, so talking about sports betting, is we launched in 2019, and we stood up sports betting through all of the governance and integrity services and such in 2020. And the reason why is that sports went on pause through the pandemic. So it would have been, a line that felt like the weight of standing out at your local DMV at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Friday. That line went away, and we were able to turn on sports betting, which has never been done in sports. And it was a huge way to acquire, casual sports fans, or gather their interest over to a lacrosse game that they've never seen before. So there's so much white meat that we have. And then there's all of like the future build that we're trying to balance. And they say the number one success metric of an operating team, your CEO or your founders, your ability to be decisive on how to allocate resources. So we talk about there's so much shit to do in pro sports, but we want to be exact around the way that we're allocating resources, especially with a smaller team.
Yep, definitely. What are your thoughts on lacrosse becoming an Olympic sport in 2028? And do you have any concerns that it's not going to be like the traditional, professional or collegiate sport with, it may be reduced down to 6v6 or 7v7? What are your thoughts on kind of it becoming an Olympic sport possibly in 2028?
Well, I would say I know way too much about IOC politics and local commissions than I ever thought I would, much like I know way too much about infectious disease, having to figure out the right protocol in 2020 so we could play, and even in 2021. It kind of drawing that example between IOC and COVID. Some people might agree with me. I think that we're on the path to becoming an Olympic sport again. So lacrosse was in the Olympics in 1904 and 1908, and then 1944 and 48 as participatory sports. So you have a competitive gold standard, and then participatory. And then we went away for a lot of reasons. There's nuance in between the clauses of amateurism and professionalism and stuff that you see with the NHL battles out, and even basketball post Dream Team. There is roughly a 10,000 athlete cap in the Olympics. So it's literally like getting into, zero bond here in New York City, or San Vicente bungalows in LA, where like there's one in, one out, and a 30,000 person wait list. And so on top of it, you see more individual sports that get bumped up to the VIP line, because you can have 16 countries competing, co-gendered, and 32 athletes. When you introduce a new team sport, you're talking about hundreds of new athletes, so less likely to get in the door. Rugby went to sevens, famously. We'll go to sixes. So I don't have a problem with it. I think like path to the Olympics is the most important thing, and a stickball and net are the same thing, no matter the size of the field or number of players on the field. In fact, the Native American game, which is called Adjunct, was first played with hundreds of people on the field at a time with no clock. So I think every version of the sport we play is a different version of its original state. Path is continuing to build progress with USOC and LA 2028, which was run by Casey Wasserman and Kathy Carter. And then, parallel to that is working with the IOC. And Jim Schur, who would have killed me for those earlier comments, is the CEO of our global governing body called World Lacrosse, formerly Federation of International Lacrosse, which we had to change the name because FIL is taken by another discipline. So there's like more nuance. But he was formerly the CEO of the USOC and running USA Wrestling. So he's got a ton of subject matter expertise and he's been leading the way.
So we have about 5 minutes left of us having our discussion, and we're going to open up to questions. So I figured we'd have a little fun here. Like you talked about Zero Bond and San Vicente Bungalows. What's like a fun or a great night out for Paul Rabil?
Long dinner and drinks, good tequila, Clase Azul.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe Casa Dragones if we're going Blanco. I like long dinners with friends and drinks, and then carrying it in around midnight so I'm not hungover the next day because I'm not productive when I'm hungover.
There you go. All right. And when you think about other professional athlete entrepreneurs, who do you look up to and who's giving you the best advice?
Oh man, so many. So I have a podcast called Suiting Up, and the goal was to in a way, like started in 2017, and one of my employees at the time was like, "Hey man, you ever thought about like recording these conversations that you have with Bill Belichick or A-Rod, who I think was your keynote last year, and Jay Williams?" And I don't know, man, you kind of disrupt relationship equity and balance when you do that, but obviously I like to talk, and I do think kind of like a locker room style conversation is fun, different than a traditional journalist interviewing. So I launched that podcast, and it's really all about learning the nuance or the in-between of how someone gets somewhere and how they, build resilience and how they handle the setbacks and the failures. Let me share like maybe one of my favorites was, maybe I'll share a few. So Jay Williams talks about on my show how to respond mid-game when you're in a downward spiral. And Shane Battier, and here we go, I'm picking a Duke team. Shane Battier, I think, is one of the greatest captains in any discipline at the collegiate level. He grabbed Jay when he was a freshman and probably going to win the Naismith Award. And he knew he was in a funk. He was like, the fastest way to build your confidence back up. And Jay was like, what? He was like, go pat your teammate on the back. And the lesson is like giving lends to receiving. And we're feeling like shit and playing poorly or just generally down. Most people don't know that. Mental health is an invisible disorder. And people don't know, and we're also trained not to ask because that's considered weakness, especially in school and in sports in particular. So you don't necessarily have to ask for help, but if you pat someone on the back, they'll pat you back. And so it is kind of in line with no such thing as a selfless deed, but that's the kind of shit that I learn on the podcast. So maybe download it and search for someone cool or someone interesting, and they'll probably share some good wisdom.
So, as we've spoken here a little bit, like it's clear you have a lot of great relationships in and around different industries and markets. And when you look at it, is there a mentor or two you go to like, when you have something you're just trying to figure out and you just want to chat?
Yeah.
And you're willing to share it. That's probably the other thing I should have said.
Yeah. Super lucky to have developed the passion to meet people and kind of the thick skin to put myself out there. I've been kind of stared at weirdly so many times by just like walking up and introducing myself. And I also know that like, if Seth Godin will say this, it typically takes 5 repetitions for anyone to register who you are, or if you're selling a product for a customer to know that you're selling a product. So remember that like introducing yourself to someone, it's unlikely that they're going to remember who you are when you see them around. I still introduce myself to Ari Emanuel when I see him, and I think I've introduced myself to him probably 5 times now. So hopefully he remembers me the next time, but I have no problem walking up to him. right? And most people have that problem. And I'm actually a natural introvert, but I'm learned extrovert through sports. My mentor that kind of keeps me at arm's length, but he's so smart and empathetic and comedic in the way that he brings relief to complicated topics, is Scott Galloway. He's out here in New York, and someone that I've run down, and despite our relationship growing in length and reciprocity and I think just like, to the degree that we talk about normal shit, I still know that he like sits on 11 boards and is a 9-time founder and now is like his own show on CNN. And if I shoot him a text, I don't have an expectation that he responds. So I think it's just like constantly living in that space and knowing that here's what I'll say. It's like, courting a potential romantic partner and trying to decide if you should send a text out is think about first if you're doing it to get a response or if you're doing it just to express how you feel. And if it's the latter, send it. And you'll be far better off because there's no expectations on a response. And if there is, it's going to pay off.
Great. I got 2 more quick questions before we open it up. And I don't want the audience to get mad at me here. Who are the 1 or 2 athletes you look up to? Current or or people that have retired?
Well, I don't think there will ever be an athlete like Michael Jordan. And I recognize respectfully his flaws as I do his knack for winning. And I'll never be Michael Jordan, and I don't want to be Michael Jordan, but you've got to be able to sit back in awe of what this man's accomplished. I think he's the greatest athlete in any sport ever. And the reason I say that is a lot of times athletes, sports is just about your ability to win and get as close to possible as finding a blueprint. And Steve Kerr, I think, is one of the greatest coaches ever, is like, Michael Jordan's the closest person to have found that blueprint.
Right.
He was in 6 NBA finals. He won all 6, and he was the MVP of all 6. So show me a better statistic that's better than that. There just isn't. And his flair for the dramatic and his hate that he kindled for others that inspired him to be so great. Again, I don't want to touch that, but I respect it. And then I would say, I guess I would also throw out Megan Rapinoe right now for what she's been able to do, not only athletically, but from an activism and support and how she's transcended sport into support of others, is not only like very relevant in this moment with equal pay and how she's pushed across, not only just gender, but love, is amazing.
All right, last one, and then we go to the audience questions. 2022 college men's national champion. Who is it?
I have no clue. I would say, well, I'm excited. 2 of my favorite people spend time with tonight. One is you, Ezra, and the other is Joe Ty. So I'm going to see him in a little bit, and he's obsessed with Yale lacrosse. So I'll give like the tip to Yale, and maybe.
Yeah, they got no chance. I mean, the Blue Devils are gonna, be there.
You guys have won enough.
You gotta know your audience here. Come on. Anyway, all right. So first question from the audience. How important to you is the growth of lacrosse at the youth level, and how are you capitalizing on this demographic?
Critical. I'll say 2 things. One is pro sports for a long time were often hypothesized around youth participation. And the more people that play, the more likely you're going to have a fan base, and the more likely the professional league is going to be successful. But I would venture to say, tell that to the NFL. That's participation has been down year over year dramatically. They're an entertainment property, and 55% of their fans are women, and who don't play contact football, or often don't. Certainly not at the participation level of men. Separate conversation. Point being, and then the UFC. How many like octagon fighters are out there? So having that mindset is like, let's not be reliant on youth participation, nor build our business case study around it. However, it is super important, because if you have that and more people are playing, then they're far more likely to watch. It's like Adam Silver told me once that selling the NBA is like selling a used car at a dealership. It's like, okay, this is going to be brilliant. Where are you going with it? And he was like, you got to get people to test drive it. So if we can get people to dribble a basketball, their likelihood of purchasing our car goes up dramatically. So I think getting sticks in hands, lowering the barrier to enter, creating accessibility, getting goals on field. There's only so many Pistol Pete Maraviches out there, Chris Pauls they're going to get on with just dribbling a ball or passing a ball against a wall if you're playing lacrosse. You got to be able to put the ball in the hoop, or you got to be able to put the ball in the net. And then being able to figure out how to fund access to equipment, because there's that barrier as well.
Next question is, it starts off by saying congratulations on the partnership with Champion. And the question is, in what ways could the PLL grow even more? And do you think it ever could be the top domestic, not only domestic, but international sport?
Appreciate the nod on Champion. We just announced that today. They're now our official jersey and sideline apparel partner of the PLL, and they're making a big investment back into team sports. Those of you who are on here may be too young, but the NBA was at its best when those players were in Champion uniforms, and that's the MJ era. We need to grow in every area. We need to grow in viewership. We need to grow in sponsorship. We need to grow in ticket sales. I hate that as like a vague answer, but I would say that actually I'll give you a little bit of inside thought. When we launched, I viewed us as a media company. That's how we were going to like ramp up and get attention. That's still the most important business unit in our organization, or any sports team or leagues business case study or model. I think now we're a ticket sales business because there's so much FOMO in sport, whether you're watching a game. A fan that doesn't know about modern sports P&Ls will say like it's all about tickets. Tickets is actually like the fourth revenue stream now. Merchandise has jumped ahead of it, sponsorship's well ahead of it, and then media rights. So it's not that impactful, but psychologically it's almost everything. So let's figure out how to put butts in seats. Will we ever be the #1 domestic sport in North America? No. I think that's like football's to lose. And just, again, being practical, why did I not launch in a bunch of markets with owners and have convinced them to build venues? It just wasn't practical. The NFL is an anomaly. They're fucking massive. But I think we can be a top 5, maybe a top 4.
Awesome. What are your, what's your advice? Is another question from the audience. What's your advice for a young professional, that wants to be a sports entrepreneur and it's just getting out into the sports world?
Sell tickets, and take, if you love media, take an AP role, be an AE, assistant editor, go like cut tape, get with people who are good at what they do. We can't, I get asked by people, hey, I'll come work for you for free. First of all, I can't do that. We're based in California, so we pay everyone. But you have to. I appreciate that sentiment though. If you can figure out how to cut your teeth from someone who's really good at what they do, try to get there. And if you can't get access to those people, get access to their team and go work for their team. There's so much value in learning how to sell a ticket. Some of the top sports executives today started there. So that's what I recommend.
Great. How do you balance being hungry and driven while still being a youthful sports league in the grand scheme of things?
Well, when we're a smaller league in the grand scheme of things, we're going to be hungry to prove ourselves and grow and be great. We're in like growth stage now. And so, we've been building this business for 4.5 years, and fatigue is natural to set in. So figuring out how to like reset daily, building routine, finding balance, is all like path taken to revitalizing and having that hunger daily. Stupid to think that I'll have the same mentality that I did 4.5 years ago today and 4.5 years ago from now. So I have to figure out ways that I continue to drive value to the company. That's the challenge.
If you were playing lacrosse or being in the sports world, what would you be doing?
Probably in the film business. I think that I would like to be, I love telling stories. It's kind of like the premise of building the league. So I would, and even in this way, if one day my board decides to kick me out, I'll go cut tape for a young producer, or like, write next to one of the better writers if I can, and learn that business. I care deeply about storytelling.
Okay. What would you say the biggest challenge in the sports business is right now?
I would say, like a lot of industries, is systemic injustice and like how to break through, whether it's Black, Indigenous, or person of color, or cross-gender, being able to get an equal shot to get the next head coaching gig, to a pathway to a front office. And when I say systemic, it is because people are trying to do their best, but systemic issues are tied to often like the referral or the kind of hereditary access that most people get in industries, whether it's, one of the most difficult industries to penetrate is Hollywood. And for that reason, it's so tied to the genealogy and fabric of that area. And same thing in sports. So you actually have to be intentional around, for head coaches that like to hire their assistant coaches, it's really about chemistry. So who have I worked with in the past? And if there is systemic racism tied to that, then it's less likely you have a talent pool of a minority group that you've worked with in the past. You just have to go do it. And I would say that's a blind spot for a lot of sports leagues and teams and such. So it's something that we need to work on.
Awesome. I think this is going to be the last one. How has Barstool helped with the promotion of the league?
Barstool has a connection to a 24 to 34-year-old sports fan that likes to go to games and drink beer and be active on social. Barstool has like a pretty edgy reputation, and that's no secret. They also have a incredibly wide variety of shows and IP. So I think partners that work well with Barstool go through the menu of IP and shows that they have and figure out where that alignment is. So for us, it was Pardon My Take and Big Cat and PMT, who have one of the largest podcasts on the internet that also were fans of lacrosse. So you figure out that connection, and we structured a relationship with them. And that's, I think, how you have to build partnerships and relationships, is figuring out the authentic tie first. Us just going and paying Barstool or going and paying Sports Illustrated, or going and paying Variety or other like said massive media conglomerate to promote the PLL, people will just see right through it. It's like an Instagram ad. You're like, fuck this. But when it's organic, you can feel it. And that's the thing about sports, like it pulsates in us, and and so there was obvious and direct alignment with scale with that show, and that's how we structured it.
Well, I want to, on behalf of the Duke Sports Business Conference, we want to thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate you giving us, your time and feedback, and we want to say thank you for joining us here. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan. There's Dan. Dan just popped up and say thank you for the time.
Well, let me say thank you to you as well quickly, Dan, before you mute me. These are like, I always feel like, what the hell am I doing here? It's like an hour of my time to talk to, 130 of you all is a pleasure, and hopefully you learned a thing or two, but hopefully it wasn't wasted time on your end. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Ezra.
Paul, real quick before you turn your video off, just to make sure, we had a lot of Dukies on the call. Brendan O'Neill, maybe going to be the lead goal scorer in college lacrosse this year.
Is that
Team's
a question?
projected to be top 3.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I wouldn't change the pick. I'm just saying.
I change the pick. Yeah. Well, okay. I think Brendan O'Neill is going to be a Tewaaraton finalist. Is he on here, or are you just referencing him?
I'm just referencing him. He could be on here. I actually have no idea.
Yeah, we have no idea. We have no ideas of who's on. So let's say he's on. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. I mean, look, Duke is a viable candidate for the championship every year. That would have been a obvious and kind of like a suck up answer, I think.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ezra. Much appreciated. Love the honesty and transparency in the conversation as always. Make sure you check out Paul and all of his various media endeavors, as well as the PLL. And Ezra, obviously great work with what you're doing as well.